Hello and welcome to my very first Flosstube. It's very strange talking into a camera, as I guess many of you who have done Flosstubes will know, but I was sort of tempted by several people to do a Flosstube, so here I am. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Jacob de Graaf. I've been a cross-stitch designer for just under 10 years now. This January I'll be celebrating the first 10 years of modern folk embroidery online. I started when I was quite young, sort of making little patterns for myself and drawing out little patterns. And it was about 10 years ago that I saw some antique embroidery at my mum's place up north in the Netherlands and got kind of tempted to start stitching again. It hadn't been something I had been doing for a long time, so I thought, like, you know what, I'm gonna start that again. I started charting an antique little pattern, really enjoyed that, and I thought, like, you know what, this is actually a lot of fun. So I started doing more, started making my own patterns, and then people said to me, like, you know, you should sell these. So I opened the shop, and yeah, I've really enjoyed it since. So, and it's been fantastic. So I thought, instead of answering a whole set of questions, instead you guys ask me questions that you would like to know. So if you go down at the comments, just send me questions that you would like me to answer. Favorite films, books, TV shows, where I'm from, you name it. Just ask me whatever you want to know, and I'll try and answer them in upcoming videos instead. Right, let's dive in with works in progress, because I think that's what most of you guys want to see. Anyway, I have a lot, as many of you will have. I have this little basket of doom that's sort of sometimes judging me for not starting projects. But I'll start with this one here. This is based on a Scottish sampler by Christina Beaton. It's a really lovely sampler. She stitched this in 1865. Now, Christina is from the area very close to Dundee in Scotland, which is on the east coast. It's a very industrial area now. It was during Christina's life as well. And I really loved this little sample, how she stitched all the beautiful bright colors that she did. And I particularly fell in love with these little flowers here that you can see, which are a feature that I have seen on some Scottish samplers. It is a weird sort of satin stitch pattern, which I really like. They're just sort of little square heads like this, and they're really beautiful, and I really like doing them. They're actually really fun to stitch, and I think they're quite moving and playful, but I've only seen them on Scottish samplers and only on around that area, from as far as I'm aware. So that's Christina Beaton. Now, the reason I haven't finished this is because it is pretty much finished, and this is really stupid. I do love the effect of eyelets, but I don't enjoy stitching them particularly. What I did for this one as well was, instead of having eyelets here, I did a rice stitch for the big alphabet. Or did I? Yes, I did rice stitches on this one for the alphabets, and I did the little eyelets all in between, and then there was going to be one there, which was going to be 2, 2, 2, 2 jumping. And like an idiot, I did 1, 1, 1. At one point, and because this is 40 count linen, it's not a lot of fun to unpick this lot. So I thought, like, you know what, I am going to put it aside and I'll pick it up next week, which was a year ago. But that's that one, and it really needs to be finished, which is very bad of me. The second sampler that is a work in progress is again a reproduction sampler. I had started, well, when I started my very first little design that I made, which is not available, but it was a reproduction from an antique pattern, but since then I only made original patterns, and I really enjoyed that. And I really respected antique samplers, but I didn't fancy really charting them at that time. And it's only been the last couple of years that I've really sort of gotten passionate about actually charting antique samplers. So I started mainly with British samplers because I have lived for 15 years in the UK, but we've moved recently back to the Netherlands, so we live in Rotterdam now. And there's a beautiful history of Dutch samplers as well, so I still collect both styles from the UK, mainly from Scotland, which I really like, but also Dutch samplers, and they're easy for me to get now because they're from the region. So this one I actually purchased when I was living in England still, so I had it mailed over from the Netherlands. I purchased it from a seller in or near Amsterdam, I believe she lives. But I really, really love this design. It's called In the Garden of Holland, and yeah, it's a really beautiful, cheerful sampler. I really, really like it. I hope you can properly see it like this. The sun is a bit bright, my apologies for that. It's been sort of gloomy all morning, and just as I turned the camera on, the sun came through, which is really nice, but it makes me sort of squint a little bit. So yeah, this one, what I really, really liked was the little houses that she stitched. They're really cute with these sort of little square gardens or pathways that she has with the little dogs, I'd say, on either side. And they do look like traditional Dutch houses with a little gable here, and it looks like little wooden houses you find in certain regions of the country. She also stitched a Dutch Virgin, but instead of having a hat on a stick, she might not have known really what the Dutch Virgin was, I guess, and she just stitched a little Virgin holding a bird on a stick, which I guess is nice as well. And what I quite liked when we moved to Rotterdam, I actually found that in the city centre there's an old square which has a huge fountain, and it has the Dutch Virgin with the stick and the hat on it, which is quite nice. I might share it with you one day when I go out and bring my camera along. So this one is again nearly finished, except for the border that I need to finish, and I kinda wanted to go and do other things once this was done, which is bad. So I really need to pick this up and just finish it and just blow through with this one. Then on to the last one there's two actually that I wanted to share with you still, or three. The summer stitch along. Now I have been very naughty. During lockdown I thought it would be a really nice idea to do a stitch along just in the summer months of a Quaker pattern that I had made, which is this one, Love Thy Neighbour, and the idea was to sort of stitch every week one page of this booklet, and I really pedalled through the first couple of pages, like going very strong, but then we had to move houses and things became very hectic, and I had to just arrange so much stuff, set up a new studio, do all the painting, do small remodeling. It wasn't a huge remodeling project, but there was a lot of work involved, which resulted in basically not having a lot of time to actually sit down and relax and stitch. But I really, really do love this sampler, and I can't wait to actually get started with it again. So I called it Love Thy Neighbour, and it was also, I guess, a bit of a response to what was happening during the first sort of lockdown that we had, where people were really taking care of one another and looking after their elderly neighbours and doing shopping for them. And of course, Love Thy Neighbour is much further than just loving your neighbour in a literal sense. It's just being kind and generous, as people should be, really. So that's this one here, and I really like this linen. I dyed it. You can see it's very, very uneven because it was actually a failed batch. It looks like a huge stain at the bottom, which I guess it is as well. But it was tea dyed, and I did it wrong, and it's a little bit too uneven, but I thought it would be quite nice for this piece as a little sort of a mock project, just to sort of like just try and see if it would actually work. And I actually quite like the effect of it. I really do like this blue as well. I think this is DMC 3750, if I'm not mistaken, but it might be a different one as well. But it is a really nice color. I really do like this, and I do like sort of plain stitching on a subtly variegated background. So when you have like your linens that are like a hand-dyed linen, then I really like that you stitch with a normal thread and not a variegated thread instead. I used to stitch a lot with hand-dyed and floss, and recently I've really gone to DMC, which I really like, but I like it on hand-dyed linens. So it's the other way around, where you have a calmer looking stitch, but a slightly more lively background. So the other work in progress, which I'm behind like everything else, is my stitch along. So this is the Modern Folk Embroidery 2020 stitch along. As you can see, I've done all of the months up to August and September, and then in October I got extremely busy with a project I have just finished, and which some of you might have seen in your inboxes, which is the 2021 stitch along. Now, I'm extremely excited about that, and I wanted to get it right, and I wanted to release it early for you guys so you can just get the materials and start ordering, so that by January 1st you have your materials and you can just start stitching and working on your project. It is very bright, by the way. Sadly, I don't have something I can put in front of this window, but hey ho. So, stitch along, the 2021, you can find all of the links to all of these patterns that I'm talking about today just here below as well. The 2021 has just been released a couple of days ago, and the first pattern will be released on the 1st of January. Now, I'm super excited about that one. It's the first two-tone color design I have made. Normally when I make original designs, nearly all of them are completely monochrome. There is something really beautiful about a monochrome design where the stitches can sort of just, you as a stitcher can just decide like, okay, I just want to stitch it in a completely different color than what's on the example page. And the beauty is that it doesn't matter actually what colors you pick. It is really what colors do you like, and that's just how it's going to be. And it's really, really quite exciting to sort of see the enjoyment that people have in picking their own colors and sort of making the piece truly their own. And people come up with ideas I would have never thought of myself, which is really exciting for me to see as a designer. So that makes me always really excited. So I really do love the hashtags that we use. So it's hashtag Modern Folk Embroidery on Instagram, and the other hashtag for the stitch alongs is MFE Sal 2020 for this year's, and MFE Sal 2021 for next year's. So because the dual color one is a tricky one to get right, I really wanted it to be right before I released it. With a monochrome sampler it's easier because I know that it will be fine whatever color you stitch it on, whatever linen. But with a duotone, because I hadn't done it a lot and because I tried something different, I really wanted to make sure that it would actually work, because it's a big pattern, there's a lot of stitches in it, and I didn't want to mess that up for you guys. So I have started it, just a small portion. I might work ahead this year instead of working alongside everyone else, purely because I wanted to get some photos ready for you guys to see, and also to talk you through some of the problems that you might be experiencing when stitching this particular design, because it is a big one. However, there are various ways to actually stitch this one. So I'm stitching it like I have charted it, with 2 different colors. You will see that my colors are slightly different from what's on the website. My blue is a little bit darker than the blue that is on the images on the website. Those 2 colors would probably be closest to DMC 3750 and 932. I have used 932, but I've got a slightly darker deep blue, which I will link underneath here in the comments because I don't have it at hand right now. So this is where I've gotten so far, and I'm really happy with it. So I've dyed a piece of 40 count linen, which was just plain white, and just brewed some Yorkshire tea and steeped it in, and as you can see, it's a really nice mottled effect. Now, a lot of people are really scared to do their own dyeing, and it really isn't scary. You just brew a really strong tea, so throw 4 to 8 tea bags in a large pot, boil water, pour it on, let it simmer for however long you want, say 10-20 minutes. Take the tea bags out, that's very important. So take all of the tea bags out. If you use loose tea, make sure that you really strain all of the tea before dyeing. Then you put a pre-soaked piece of linen in. Now, it is very important to actually pre-soak the linen. If you don't pre-soak your linen, you will get a different effect. That might be interesting, but it will be really mottled, like very over the top mottled, because the dry fabric will start seeping in quite irregularly, and will take on the dye in a very blotchy way. Splotchy, it's not a word. But yeah, so this one, as you can see here, it is very sunny, my apologies for that, but you can see that it is really quite a beautiful effect. It is mottled, but it is not too harsh, the mottling effect. And because I work with DMC, it's a not variegated yarn. Now, I would warn, if you want to use a variegated thread, do keep in mind that this is quite a busy pattern. Now, if you have a busy pattern with a very busy thread color, it might start getting a little bit too wild, and it doesn't become calm on the eye anymore. If you want to have something a little bit mottled, I would suggest instead just dyeing your ground cloth instead of working with an over dyed thread, and you do save a bit of money as well, because the DMCs are much cheaper than old beautiful hand dyed floss. I would say for a monochrome piece, the hand dyed floss is just perfect. It is really beautiful, and I would definitely recommend them. But for this particular one, if you use them, make sure that you use very subtly variegated thread, and if you use 2 tones, make sure that the 2 colors, when you stitch with them, don't have such a contrast that you can't see the difference between the 2 threads, because I have seen variegated threads next to each other where you can't tell them apart anymore because they're so variegated. So this one makes use of a negative effect. So what I have is it looks a bit black actually, but it's very deep blue. That's the main pattern of this, and then filled in are these bits here with a light blue. Now, as you can see, the actual pattern has not been stitched, so the pattern is the bit here that's left open, and I really like that effect. Now, there is the option for you, if you don't want to do the background stitching, because it is quite a bit of work and not everyone will have either the time or the enjoyment to do that, you can choose to, instead of stitching it with 2 colors, you can choose to stitch it with just 1 color, and instead of stitching the background, you just ignore all of that. You just stitch all of what is the dark blue color. In these bits here, you stitch that dark blue as well. You just swap that around, the same here. But these bits here, you don't fill that up, and you don't fill this up either. Instead, what is not stitched on the pattern, you actually start to stitch that with your darker thread. So you stitch the branches here and the little flowers, and so you just stitch that. It makes the pattern being stitched up quicker, uses less floss, but it does give it a different effect. The same for the zigzag here, so don't stitch the blues as it is here, but stitch the background instead with a dark thread, and that will give that monochrome effect. It's very easy to do it yourself, you just need to plan it a little bit. But that's the 2021 SAL, which you can order now. If you order it like previous stitch alongs, you are added to a mailing list, so I would really urge you to check the email address that you supply me with, that it is typed in correctly, as it is very difficult for me to contact people once I don't have their contact details. From the 1st of January onwards, there will be a newsletter sent out to you with download links. So once you have paid for it, it's £18, and from that time you don't have to pay anything else. It's not auto-renewable, because I hate that myself. So you don't have to worry about anything. You just, every month until 1st of December 2021, you will be getting one part. So there's 12 parts in total, and by the 1st of December 2021 you've got the whole stitch along complete. Right, let's see, I have one last, I went on off a tangent there. I've got one last work in progress. Now this is actually one of my last releases as well, along with the stitch along. So I'll show you actually the antique one, which is hanging, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but it's hanging just here. I'll take that off the wall. This is PFW 1858. Yeah, 1858. That's the original sampler here. I really love this sampler. It's such a sweet thing. The girl who stitched it only signed her initials on it, so there's no real way of telling who she was, where she was from. I'm making the assumption that it was an English sampler, as it does kind of feel and look like an English sampler, and it is really lovely. It's really beautiful, because yellow tends to sort of faint on a lot of antique samplers a lot of the time, and her yellows are really beautiful and lively, as you can see here. It's probably like a goldenrod type of sort of yellow that she's used, and it's also interesting because chemical dyes already were a thing back in this year 1858, but this very much looks to me like it was stitched still with probably leftover threads that her family still had, using non-chemical dyes. So the blues here are probably indigos. There's probably the beautiful goldenrod or weld, and it's just a really beautiful sampler. And it speaks of such joy for animals and nature. So she stitched lots of little birds here, and little dogs, and what are probably ferrets or weasels or something like that. There's very little, or maybe it's a tiny dinosaur. There's one little tiny animal which is stitched over one, but as you can see, it's so small, you can leave that off if that's not your jam. You just skip it. The other quirk that this sampler has is that she decided to stitch these little trees with the top of the tree here stitched right in between two crosses, which means that if you do stitch it, you have to make sure that you sort of stitch it on a linen. It's not possible to stitch this sampler on Aida fabric, but yeah, it is a really charming piece here. That's this one. And this is how far I have gotten. And again, I was going to sort of really rock on with this and just stitch it really fast. And I did, because this is just a few days worth of stitching, and I was going so well, but then I felt that I had to really get the stitch along ready for you guys. So that got precedence, and yeah, so that's where we are with those. Right. On to finishes, because I have some of those as well. Now, I'm not going to share a ton of finishes because I am the designer, I am the stitcher as well, which and I try to run my own business, which means that even though I would wish to be able to stitch all of the things, I just can't. And when I stitch something, it has to be one of my own designs. So this is a huge limitation for me, where I don't finish a huge amount of project. I design way more patterns than I can actually stitch. But I do have some that are mainly sort of taken with me when I travel. And I finish them with a little edge design usually, because I like that, and I can stitch them onto a wall quite easily. So first one, we have the winter border pattern here. That's this design here. I designed this a couple of years ago, and I'm still really happy with this one. I do want to frame this one and actually display it for Christmas and sort of permanently as well. My plan is to actually hang most of my work in a really big hallway that we have in this new house that we live in. I really like this one because it's a weird jumble of different styles. So there's the sort of Scandinavian style borders here that we see. We have a beautiful alphabet that I stole from antique Icelandic sort of church cloths. I do believe they were woven originally, but the lettering was so beautiful, and I thought, like, you know what, I would really like to actually see that as an alphabet sampler. Now, there were some letters missing, so I had to make them up in the same sort of Icelandic style as on the original woven fabrics, but I really like what they look like. I think it's a really beautiful, it's like a weird medieval Gothic lettering, but it's not like anything I have ever seen quite like this before, with the little holes in there, and I think they're quite unique. This border I adapted from an antique design that I found in a very, very old book from Germany, which was one of the first pattern books that was widely published. And I used it with the reason that I wanted to use something that influenced how sort of the Western world got patterns, in that a lot of patterns were sort of came from all over the place, and before the printed book, people would just stitch their own patterns, and it was sort of the mother made something and passed it on to the daughter, or in the case of the guilds, it was actually the men who were doing the stitching and would teach it to the apprentices. So it was much more a local influence that you had, and then with the sort of advent of book printing, suddenly you get printed books that everyone can use, and you see in the west of Europe that there is suddenly very much a shared language. So in the German countries, in the Netherlands, in France, Spain, you see it in the Scandinavian world as well. Everywhere there are patterns that look extremely alike, and they're all you can trace most of those back to just a handful of books that were circulating throughout Europe, and a lot of them were printed either in Italy or in Germany. This particular one was done in Germany, and I really, really liked it. It's got the beautiful acorns and the heart and the deer. I did change the design, but I wanted to kind of keep it, but change it a little bit, because that was also something happened. People would copy it and copy it and copy it, and the designs would change. So the designs actually evolved through the copying, which I really like. So it's a blend of lots of original. So these are all original patterns that I came up with that look Scandinavian but aren't truly Scandinavian. There's an Icelandic alphabet and a weird German little border, and because it's one color, it makes a really nice whole. So that's the winter border sampler. The other design that I am very pleased with, which I started a couple of times and abandoned it, because as it goes, sometimes you start a project and you have an idea for it and then you just don't like it. So that was the case with my design called Valknut pillow pattern, which is also a Scandinavian design. So I started that and I still really, really love it. But I did this with hand-dyed wool floss that I made with natural dyes. The only problem was that once I had done this, I put it away, used up some of the wool that I had from the same batch, and I couldn't get it to match to finish this design. So it's just a quarter of a pillow pattern, and it's a shame because there's a lot of stitches on this, and it is, I really like the colors, but I just couldn't match them anymore. And I've tried some traditional sort of Scandinavian medieval like stitching on here as well. So these are not crosses, they're sort of like a long armed cross stitch, which was quite common back then. It's a stitch that people mainly have forgotten about, but I wanted to do the long running ones just in that sort of long armed cross, as it gives a really unusual texture to the piece. It's not a difficult stitch at all, but it is not the easiest thing to work it into a pattern, because you do need to plan it a little bit more than just a straightforward cross. Hence I haven't done it in the rest of this piece, but yeah, I do like this one. The same went for this one, which is the Swedish horses. So that's this one here, and yeah, I started this one and I just loved it, but I wasn't in love with the background at all. I had it was too light and it was too sort of bland, I felt. So once I had finished the whole piece, I just dipped it into a bath with some, I think it was turmeric. Yeah, it was a turmeric bath. And I'm really happy with how this piece turned out. So it is loosely based on Swedish sort of tapestries and pieces from Hälsingland in Sweden, which I really like. And this pattern actually has a lot of stitches, because as you can see, there is sort of the negative of these crosses is sort of found here, which sort of makes it very dense. And I tried something different with this one as well on several spots to see if I could actually do a sort of a reverse, not reversible in slides, but sort of keep stitching it in runs, just going half crosses all the way up, all the way down, which sort of creates like a reversible design, which I quite like. But that's this one. Again, this needs to be properly framed now, so I can display it in my house. The last sampler that I wanted to share with you is a fairly recent release as well in my shop, and it's Joan Sands of Kinross from 1839, and she stitched this on the 31st of this, at least she dated it on the 31st of December, and I can kind of imagine little Joan stitching in her little cottage, trying to finish this before the New Year's celebrations would start off. In the area where she lived, they had a tradition of first footers, which was after the bells tolled 12 during midnight. It was very auspicious to have your first guests in the new year, preferably tall, dark gentlemen, and they would bear some symbolic gifts, usually a fruit cake or something like that would be eaten. And they would sing songs, I guess. So I guess Auld Lang Syne and all of that stuff would be sung. But it is a really charming sampler. I really love the beautiful border that she stitched, and the little cottage, and the crazy huge flower tree, and the diamond that she stitched here. It's all 2 crosses over 2 threads, except for the date, December 31st, 1839, which is stitched over 1. And like all Scottish, or most Scottish samplers, she stitched her siblings and her parents' names and initials on this one. So she actually fully stitched John Sands, Isabella Hardy, which is her mother, and then Joan Sands at the bottom, and then even her village, which made research a lot easier. However, I have not been able to find out anything besides that she was born in May, and I don't know when she died. I know that she lived in Kinross. I know a lot of stuff about her brothers and sisters and her mother and her father, but sadly nothing about little Joan herself, because she's a mystery. So I don't know what happened with her, how old she was when she died, where she was buried. There is literally just no information about her. But I do love the colours of this sampler, and I do have the original here as well, which is quite a bit bigger because I stitched mine on 40 count linen, and I think hers was probably on something like 24 count or 20, maybe 28 count. So as you can see, it is quite a bit smaller, mine, than the original is. But I just love the colours. I really love the liveliness of the whole piece. It is really a beautiful sampler. So that's Joan Sands, and she has a very special place in my studio as well. I will show you my studio a little bit better in a coming video as well, so you have a bit of an idea of how I work and where I work. The last thing, because I've noticed that I have been going on for quite a bit longer than I would have thought I would be, the last thing I wanted to share with you is I was recently featured in this really lovely Japanese magazine. It's called Stitch E-Days, and it's volume 32 if you wanted to get this, and I really would recommend this magazine, but it is really beautiful. I'll share some pages with you. I don't want to share the pattern pages with you, and it's Japanese, so it's not in English. It is all in Japanese, but you should be able to to stitch quite a few designs. My pattern is available as a kit that you can order from their website. Now, I'm not sure what the shipping costs would be for the rest of the world, but if you live in Japan or neighboring countries, it probably is worth getting this one. But it is there's some charge here as well in this magazine, so it is a really beautiful magazine. As you can see, there's some really gorgeous patterns here, and it's a Japanese magazine, so you start at the last page for how Western people would look at it. That's absolutely gorgeous here. So this is the piece, that's the design I made for the magazine here on this page. So it's an exclusive design, and you can order it through them. That's just some older stuff, and there's a little interview here. Look, that's me stitching, merrily stitching away. But it is a beautiful magazine, as you can see, and there's a lot of inspiration, a lot of beautiful things here to see. Even if you don't speak Japanese, I would recommend that you can order it. I have seen it online on Amazon. I will put a link to that as well for you. So if you want it, you can get it. It's not cheap to get it imported, I believe. I think in euros it was about 20 something euros to get just that one magazine. But it is beautiful, and I think for the amount of patterns that you get and for the inspiration that you get from this, it is definitely worth getting this one. So I think that's it for me for this episode. I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, just hit that like button right at the bottom. And if you want to be kept up to date when the next video is coming out, do subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you will get a little notification once you log in that there's a new video available. And finally, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time again. Bye bye.